name is Bajekal, and I'm the managing director for the FMF group of companies, and been here for about 7.5 years now. So um, it's been a lovely thing working with a listed company, and I think as we go along, hopefully I'll be able to tell you why I find it comforting working with listed companies. I think the reason for listing FMF, which was then Flour Mills of Fiji, quite different from the reason for listing Rice Company Fiji and Atlantic and Pacific Packaging, which is better known as ATPAC. And the reason for listing Flour Mills of Fiji, from my conversation with the promoter group, is basically that when they took over this company, it was in shambles. And Mr. Harry Punja, who was tasked with managing the company as the chairperson, he realized that when he looked around him, he saw that a lot of the companies around the world that were very successful were listed. And when he analyzed what reasons made them successful, there were a whole lot of them. And I think the primary one amongst them was the discipline. The discipline that comes in when you have a listed company. You're in some way under public scrutiny all the time. You're under the scrutiny of financial institutions that have invested in you. You're under the scrutiny of retail investors. So there is a hard requirement on governance. And I think that part of it is clearly what drove Mr. Punja to decide into listing Flour Mills of Fiji. And I think that really, it was also early times on the stock exchange, early days, and it was perhaps a good time to get on board and start as one of the pioneers in the stock exchange. So the primary reason really was the discipline and governance that being listed would bring in. Segregation of personal and private expenditure, which is sometimes difficult in private organizations. Ability to get the right person for the job and not necessarily somebody from the family and from the promoter group. So it cuts out things like nepotism, it cuts out things like favoritism. It really brings about people that the board or the shareholder group believe is the best person to run the business. So I think these were some of the driving factors that encouraged Mr. Harry Punja to, as the chairman of Flour Mills of Fiji, to take the company for listing. In the case of ATPAC and Rice, that was entirely reasons of getting funding, because FMF was not in a position that time to be able to put out too much of an outlay to get the new projects going. So the listing of these two companies, even as they started, provided a good avenue to raise funds and put up two companies that now are immensely successful. So it's been vindicated as a good decision, having gone forward at that point in time. If you look at what listing does, listing kind of connotes a bit of organization, as in a listed company is seen to be organized, a listed company is seen to be of a certain size, a listed company is seen to be professional. It is our dream and vision that now in anything related to food, we want to be the port of first call for any overseas investor coming into the country and looking to invest and looking for partners. So being a listed company affords us this opportunity to attract potential investors, because then they see that this is a company that is already listed, has obviously governance and practices that allow for a good partnership. So it satisfies that dream of ours. It also satisfies us from another angle, that we're able to attract professionals, which I think is something that a lot of professionals look for when they're looking for jobs. They look for how is the company managed. Is it is it a tightly held and managed company by the promoter group, or is it a listed company that allows the professionals flexibility to work and fulfill their professional dreams? So these are some of the things that really are things that professionals look for. There is, of course, now there's also the issue of independence of the board. When you have listing and you have listing rules which require a certain degree of or a certain number of independent directors, that's something that also comes into the board. You have the independence apart from just the promoter group that is on the board. It brings about diversity, because when you're looking for professional independent directors, you're looking at a much wider spectrum than what would be available from a narrow promoter group. You're also looking, we clearly in Fiji we have the advantage of a beneficial tax rate, so that's certainly something that is helpful. But what it brings about is continuity, which is again one strong reason why Mr. Aripunja at that point in time did look at listing, because it brings about continuity in the organization and doesn't really require, or doesn't put any burden on whether there's a next generation that's able to take it forward or not, because there is continuity afforded through the listing and the ability to attract people. So that is something as well. Certainly not insurmountable, and these are sort of questions that any stock exchange listed company anywhere in the world will face, having to deal with shareholders, most of whom are very, very good, but there are clearly some difficult guys who make it a point to be present and make a bit of a noise and sometimes petty things, sometimes valuable insights as well, which is good. And at the end of the day, we need to remember that it is their company, so we have to hear them out. It's not that we can choose to ignore them and say who cares, I don't give a damn about you because you're just a small shareholder. I think that would be very wrong, and that's something that we don't do. As a philosophy, we listen to them. We may not be able to implement all their suggestions, which sometimes is a bit disappointing for them, and some of them do tend to take it personally. But I think end of day, it's about being fair to the vast majority of shareholders and making sure that what we do is right by them for the greater good. So long as that is seen to be done in a bona fide manner, I think that's something that eventually everybody understands. So that's not a problem. There's some issues which are unique to a small market like Fiji, and that would be the fact that as a public listed company, your financials are out there in the open for everybody to see. And when you're in a small market where there are either duopolies or oligopolies, you have competitors who have very closed financials that you can't look at. So you're a bit of, in a way, kind of fighting in the dark, whereas they have the spotlight on you when they're fighting you. So it's a bit of an unequal playing ground, but we do believe that the other advantages that I mentioned make us that much more agile when we're operating, and make us that much more careful. So it's not something that's terrible to get around, and it's not something owing to which I wouldn't list it.